Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of Magicians Without Borders Conversations. We are so glad that you are joining us. We have a great episode planned for you today. And before we start, I have an announcement that has me very, very happy, and is that Magicians Without Borders is actually now on Patreon. We are now on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/MWB to check out our Patreon webpage where you can see, let me take my glasses off, where you can see the different tiers and different things that you can get in return. So I am going to show you how our Patreon page looks. There it is. Oh, let me see the public page. Thank you. There it is. That's our Patreon page. We've got item. I'm not showing it. Here it is. There you go. So this is the Patreon page. You've got different levels of membership. You have an apprentice, one for $3 a month. You have a wizard or a wizardess for $5, a sorcerer or sorceress for $10. You've got an enchanter and enchantress for $15, a warlock maximus for $100, and a master magician for $200 a month. So please go and check them out. It's a great way to support us. So remember, Patreon, it's a way for you to support creators by a small monthly fee, and you're going to get some rewards in return. So please do check that out, because we are new in the Patreon website. So if you can, go check it out, because it's a great way to support us, and we really want that support, and also to connect with you in different ways, because we love doing that as well. And before we start, I want to remind you, everybody, that we have our mailbag episodes the last Wednesday of every month. So if you want us to answer your questions or you have comments, please do send them to our email podcast@magicianswithoutborders.com or tweet them at magicianswb so we can discuss them on the show. And of course, I want to remind you that we have a store where you can get magic from us. You can go to store.magicianswithoutborders.com and there you can get magic from us. And that's another way that you can support us. You can have a magic show at home, virtually done by us and our students in the slums of big cities in South America. We've done shows with kids from El Salvador, from Costa Rica, and from Colombia, and they can do a show for you and yours at home. Also, we have some workshops. So if you want to learn some tricks by us, Tom, me, and the kids from the slums of South America, you can do that as well. And if you want to learn magic a little bit more in depth, we have a course called Become a Magician, and you can get it in our store for yourself or to give it as a gift. So please go and check that out, store.magicianswithoutborders.com. And as always, I am here with the one and only Tom Verner. So Tom, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very good, and very much in the middle of winter these days here in February and March begin to feel like winter's going on and on. But it's a beautiful day today, actually. Very sunny, and it makes all the difference when the sun is out, even though it's cold. It's beautiful. So I'm here. Excited about our guest tonight, one of my favorite people in the world, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful conversation. I also wanted to mention, I mentioned it in our conversation a week or so ago, we're really rethinking and relaunching our Warrior Wizard program, which is, teaching veterans to become magicians so that they can perform for other veterans who are hospitalized, or to perform at events, holiday parties, all kinds of events for veterans and their families. And I'm very much in the middle of that and communicating a lot with the Veterans Administration, and they're very excited about possibly underwriting the program this time. So we'll see. But that's what's on my mind at the moment. Taking advantage of not being able to travel. So I'm home here writing grants and trying to create new programs. So that's...
But I love that program, Tom.
Yeah.
I love the program and what you want to achieve with it. I think it's wonderful. We will definitely have an episode dedicated to the Warrior Wizards program when it's completely mapped out, when we have all the details, so we can have this out there, because we are going to ask for your support. So if you're a magician and you're interested in doing social magic nearby where you're at, this Warriors program will be the way that you can definitely do some social magic in the States to start.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for saying that, Carlos, because we would love to have a magician in all the cities and towns where there are veterans centers and hospitals, so that you can gather together a dozen or 8 or 10 or 12 veterans and teach them magic. And the grant that I'm writing will hopefully enable us to pay those magicians and supply them with props and transportation. And so anyhow, as Carlos said, we'll keep you posted on how this is developing and how you can help us and get involved. Okay.
That will be awesome. And so, yes, stay tuned. But for tonight's episode, Tom, we're going to look back at our campamentos in El Salvador.
Oh,
So, I just wanted to ask you a question. Do you think that those campamentos, we've touched on this before, but how do you think these campamentos, reshaped your vision of Magicians Without Borders? How would you sum it up?
well, it completely changed Magicians Without Borders. I mean, prior to El Salvador and beginning to take a small group of kids and really teaching them magic in an intensive kind of way, changed it from entertainment to educate and empower. And we just felt frustrated going down and only meeting with the young learning magicians in a brief kind of way. So we developed these week-long programs that you're going to hear about tonight called Campamentos, where we did a whole bunch of things. And I won't say any more about those until later.
Okay, before we get into it, we have a great guest, right? And I would love to hear any stories, any anecdotes you have or you would like to share before we introduce her. Any anecdotes about her that you want to tell us?
Yeah, I feel like Lauren and I were the madre and padre of the Campamentos. We very, very much did them together, created them together. Both of us taught there. It was an absolute joy to have a compatriot to work with who, is really talented and bright and fluent in Spanish. And she did a lot. She had a lot more organizational skills than I did. So that was very a wonderful balance. I think we balanced each other very well.
That's awesome. And well, who are we talking about, Tom? Because we want to introduce her. So tell us a little bit more about her.
Well, we're talking about a wonderful woman who I met here in Vermont when she was a student at Middlebury College. And she ended up volunteering at the school where my daughter was, a middle school, just for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And that's how we met. And that's like a long time ago. Oh, my goodness. I don't know. Maybe 20 years.
We're going to find out how long ago. So we are so glad that we're joined by Lauren Markham. She is a fiction writer, essayist, and journalist. And she has, worked most often with issues related to youth migration, the environment, and her home state of California. She is the author of The Faraway Brothers, Two Young Migrants and the Making of an American Life, a great book that has won many awards. And we will talk about that book and other things that she's been up to and how she got connected to Magicians Without Borders and all her stories in our campamento. So, Lauren, how are you? And welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you feel so far away these days. It's wonderful you're all the way across the continent. So it's I miss you, and it's so great to have this opportunity tonight.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here, and just also so amazed and impressed by how much. By the way, the answer is I first worked with Magicians Without Borders in 2006, so it was many years ago, and it's pretty beautiful to see how much it's grown and all the work that Carlos has put into it. It's just so exciting. What an amazing organization.
Wow. Wow.
So
Okay.
good. So good. So it was like a couple of years ago. No?
Yeah, a couple.
Yeah.
Just a couple. So, Lauren, for people that might not know who you are, can you please just give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm an educator. I've worked for a long time at the intersection of education and immigration, mostly in the United States, but I've also done some work in El Salvador with Campamento and some work in East Africa as well. So yeah, I've been working more on the student services side of education with newly arrived immigrant youth in various nonprofits in California and at a school called Oakland International High School. And I'm also a writer. I started out more as a fiction writer and essayist. I still write fiction and essays, but over time I've become more of a journalist as well, essentially writing about social issues that I feel like are not talked about enough and that feel important to talk about. And one of the I'm an author, and I wrote a book published in 2017. I used to say it was recently published, but I think with everything that's happened, like 2017 is no longer recent. It's been a while, and also like the world is a completely different world. But my book that I published in 2017 is called The Faraway Brothers: Two Young Migrants and the Making of an American Life. That's it right there. And it's a story that actually takes place in El Salvador. So it was the first trip that I took with Magicians Without Borders that was really ultimately paved the way long into the future for me writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. So I'm a little bit curious about this book and why El Salvador. So can you just talk a little bit more about the book and why is it so important for you to talk about migrant issues?
Yeah, sure. Well, I as a writer, I'm incredibly interested in migration as a prism through which we can understand social issues and social problems, and humanitarian issues and humanitarian crises. And so, to me, migration is a really vital prism, because anytime a group of people moves, especially when it's many people, and sort of all of a sudden or quickly starts moving from one place to another, there's some reason, right? And we have to ask I think we need to ask why. Interestingly, migration is something, and I promise not to be too wonky, but migration is often something we think about and litigate in this country, in the United States, where Tom and I live, as something that we litigate, although this happens all over the world as well, at the border. We think about it as a border issue, but migration is not a border issue, right? Migration, like, there are all these factors that propel migration long before someone leaves their home, right? Historical factors, factors of inequality, environmental factors, all of these things that put pressure on a person to leave their home for somewhere else. And while El Salvador has long been, has a very strong and historic connection to the United States in terms of migration and just like Salvadoran American populations who've lived here for generations, starting in around 2011, 2012, the number of young people who were leaving El Salvador to the United States and who were traveling by themselves, without crossing into the United States without papers and not in the custody of their parents, that number started rising incredibly high, and started essentially doubling every year for several years. And of course, last year is an anomaly year because of the pandemic, but essentially the number of young people coming not just from El Salvador, but El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala primarily by themselves is still at record highs. And those are young people generally fleeing community violence at home and seeking safety in the United States. And the United States has criminalized both these individual young people coming trying to come to the United States for safety, and has also criminalized the profile of young Latinx, largely young Central American teenagers, normally boys, that has become, they've created a boogeyman out of these young people. And that was all very troubling to me. So I felt the need to write about it.
I think that's awesome. I mean, hearing you talk about with that, very well informed, very, very, very assertive about these issues. I think it's something that we need to, talk more about, not just in the U.S. where you guys are at, but globally. There's a lot of migrants all over. We here in Colombia, where I am at, we have this situation with Venezuela. We've got a lot of migrants crossing over.
Yeah.
It's of course a very different situation for them because Colombia and the laws, and it's very, very different than in the States. And well, my sister lives in El Paso, Texas.
Uh-huh.
So she does work in the border, and Tom has gone over there and done some performances, and we know it's a very a important issue, but very sensitive as well. Yes. So I want to thank you for writing that book and for shining a light in that subject, which I think it's so important. Anything you want to add to that, Tom?
I would also encourage people to read it because they'll learn a lot. But it's also, as Lauren said, she started out more as a fiction creative writer, and the book in many ways reads like a novel. I mean, it really, she's a great storyteller and weaves a lot of wonky stuff into the story in a beautiful way, and you don't know you're learning so much because the story is so compelling, and the relationship between the two brothers, and they're very different, and yet they find themselves caught up in a very similar situation. It's a wonderful book. It's beautiful. And it's got, as Carlos said, wonderful recognition. So that's awesome. And also I think of you, Lauren, your first journalism stuff started out in Africa, right? With migration and climate. I mean, I think you're one of the very first people that ever, maybe the first person where I heard the term climate refugee, and showing how, incredibly connected, obviously, when you think about it, but it just didn't dawn on me. And since then, I just read not very long ago that the estimate, because of climate change, however many, the number varies when you hear it, like 60 million refugees at the moment, say, displaced, externally displaced people. But by as early as 2040, there could be 250 million because of climate change. I mean, that's staggering. I don't know.
It's totally staggering. And I don't think, for a number of reasons, I think there were lots of academics who were thinking about climate migration, but there weren't a lot of journalists writing about it. One of my first journalistic assignments was to write about climate migration, and I focused on East Africa, kind of the Horn of Africa, and particularly I was looking at folks who'd come from southern Ethiopia into Kenya. I was sort of talking broadly, but that the lens was focused there. And one of the problems then, and that was back in 2011, and still now, is that there is no international designation of a climate refugee.
I know,
certain way, right? Which is astounding, because, like you say, it's one of the projected the largest projected causes of migration. And here in the U.S., we only have to look at things like what just happened in Houston, the forest fires that basically dominate. September used to be it's my birthday month. I'm a Virgo, in case anyone wanted to know. And it used to be the most stunning month out here, as you know, Tom, because I think you visited then. It's like the most beautiful month, and now it's like we all have to be inside with our masks, because we have to be inside with our masks on because it's these fires are so devastating and toxic. So we don't have to look far to understand why to even it's no longer this dystopic future, right? It's already happening. And something that I found even in Central America and El Salvador, and I wonder if you saw this at all in the later years of Campamento and just traveling to El Salvador, that when I talk to people who have migrated, no matter where they're coming from, often they rarely name climate as a reason that they've left home, but often if you kind of scratch the surface enough, there's some climate dimension, right? Like, oh, there were no longer jobs in the fields anymore, right? Or like, oh, we could no longer feed our family because the rain didn't come. And yeah, it's really upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, it really affects, a country like El Salvador that has so much agriculture,
Yes.
both commercial agriculture as well as family agriculture, and it's devastating.
Yes.
When that, yeah. So yeah, I don't know if it's still true, but I think it is. The UNHCR doesn't really recognize climate refugees.
Yeah. It's like the UNHCR knows that it's an issue, but there's no like global protective framework, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's like, yeah, there is such a thing as a climate refugee, but you cannot become a capital R refugee with the protections that are afforded. Similar to like this idea, like, oh, there's no economic, there's this weird way that like economic refugee is almost like a not quite slur level, but it's like this poo-pooed sort of like, oh, greedy person trying to come here, cross some border to get some, to get other people's money. It's like this kind of mythology of the bad economic migrant. And I think climate migrant is maybe like, a rung below that and sort of just like poo-pooed status.
Yeah. Well, it has to do with still us, so many people denying, the horror of climate. And if we acknowledge that, oh my God, just the implications are staggering. But what happened in Texas or the fires in California or the hurricanes, it's no longer. I mean, I heard Texans like 2 weeks ago saying, I don't care what you call it. Let's do something about it.
Help, we're freezing in our own homes. Like,
I don't believe in climate change, but let's do something about it. Anyhow, let's talk about Campamento. That'd be great.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Lauren. So when was it? Well, of course, because of the work you do and your interest, you've been close to working with NGOs in the social sector and all that. But I wanted to hear, from you, when was the first time that you heard about Magicians Without Borders, and what was your impression of it?
The first time I heard about Magicians Without Borders, I imagine was like my sophomore year of college. So I worked, as Tom said, at I volunteered a couple days a week at a school, volunteer and then worked at a school called the North Branch School in a very small town called Ripton, Vermont, neighboring Tom's town. And it was this one-room schoolhouse, sort of magical utopia kind of school. And I, of all things, people laugh when I tell them this, but I was an assistant math teacher because it was such a small school, but it was also really individuated. So like algebra and geometry and algebra 2 would like all be in the same classroom. So I'd go over and teach, algebra 2 kids. And one of those students was Tom's daughter. And she told me one day, oh yeah, my dad's a magician. He runs an organization called Magicians Without Borders. And I was like, what is that? That is so cool. Like, what is that? And so I knew about Magicians Without Borders, but then that school, a few years later, that school wanted to create kind of a service learning trip. And so they asked me to work with Tom to create a service learning trip for the 9th graders. And we were planning on taking, and we did take a number of, I think there were 4 or 5 in that class. I can't remember.
Something like that, 5, 6.
To El Salvador, with some families to do some service learning work and to kind of like, the idea was to sort of widen their horizons as well, outside of this, very small school, as they were sort of moving out into the world. And we were having a parent meeting. I remember this. We were having a parent meeting about this trip in December. I was about to go home for the holidays, and Tom said, oh my gosh, I just lost my art teacher. We're doing this big camp. We've never done this campamento before. We're doing this big camp. We live in 2 weeks. Can you come to El Salvador? And I was like, let me check. Yes, I can come. Yes, like absolutely. And so I ended up going down for the first campamento, which was this another sort of like beautiful, messy utopia, like in the beautiful name of mess, right? That it was like we were building something with this incredible NGO named Asap Rosar, and Tom's organization and these other incredible educators from the Bay Area. And that was the first. Tom had done a lot of work with this organization before, but that was the first campamento. And I think there was that way that magic was in the air for the young people, for the nonprofit, for Asap Rosar in El Salvador, for us. And it was like, oh, we got to keep doing this.
Where did we do that first one?
Up near La Palma, I think.
Oh, that's right. It was up near the Honduran.
Yeah, up near the Honduran border.
Honduran border, right?
In this region where they have this really this like kind of style of painting that's really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and actually that was really cool. This is just like an interesting story that we were there and all of our little like bungalows were kind of this sort of reddish brown color. But there was a muralist who this area belonged to the government. It was like a government camp that we'd rented it from. And they'd hired a muralist. So like unbeknownst to us, like there was a muralist coming. So like by that, we started and all of them were these red, brown. And then by the end, every single bungalow that we were in, there were probably like 10 or 12 of them were like these incredible murals all over them. It was sort of like, it was like an incarnation of the dreamscape, you know, that we were
right.
Yeah.
And they're very colorful and incredible. Very indigenous to that part of El Salvador, Honduras. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, I remember we went there a couple of years, I think. We went to La Palma and then we went to Cotepeque.
Right.
Lago de Cotepeque. Yeah.
Yeah. I think logistically Cotepeque was easier because it had a little bit more infrastructure. And closer, I think. But yeah. There was something really special about that first one too.
Yeah.
Can you share some of your first impressions, about arriving there and you were arriving there with a magician and some other arts teachers and like your impressions of the place plus traveling with that crew.
Yeah, I mean, the group was incredible. And I thought what was so beautiful was like, so one of the things is that this organization, Asap Rosar, had like youth centers, kind of, they're sort of after school and before school programs. In El Salvador, because of overcrowding, students either go to the school in the morning or the afternoon, which leaves a lot of unstructured time and a lot of time where students, young people don't necessarily have activities or really, like parents are at work, of course, and there's not a lot for them to do. It can also, for older kids, be kind of a risky time, right? To not sort of have any structured positive activity to be a part of, because we know that gangs prey on young people and young recruits. So these, there were two at the time, kind of after school, before school programs, kind of community centers, and they had brought their youth leaders. So it was this sort of motivating. It was like for the youth leaders, it was sort of this like, okay, for you guys, there's going to be like this special trip. And I guess I'll say, I think about this anytime at any kind of retreat I've ever been on, any kind of like structured excursion. I think for anyone, like it's sort of, there's this way that Campamento in particular, and I think if it's done right and with intention, those kind of spaces, especially for young people, but for adults too, can be this really magical, transformative container where you're sort of saying, okay, we're going somewhere, we're going all together, we're going with this intention and with a spirit of community and with a sense of purpose and celebration, and like commitment to one another. And I felt that very much, like when we were on the bus on the way up there, when we were like unloading everything, when we were sort of figuring out how we wanted this place to be, it very much had that like utopic vision feel for everyone.
Yeah, and these kids didn't have things like that in their life. I mean, this was like literally, in some cases, in many cases, a life, once in a lifetime kind of experience to get away from, often very difficult home life situations and, the poverty of their lives, and then to come out to a beautiful place and to, as I used to say, just spend a week laughing and learning. It was a pretty exciting thing for them, and certainly for us as well.
Yes. Yeah, and I think affirming too, because these are young people who were and are so smart and so motivated and so brilliant and had so much capacity. And yeah, often we're living in really trying circumstances. And so it's like this opportunity to kind of affirm all the work that they'd done and just like who they were, and get to kind of have that be center. And yeah, of course, the challenges of their lives didn't magically go away, but they got to not sort of be immediately on their shoulders for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the barefoot angel magicians, when I would ask them, why do you like doing magic? And they would give two often, similar, would say the same thing. They would say, I love making other people happy with my magic. I love making people smile, and especially I can remember these kids saying, we really like to perform for poor people, and they didn't have like 2 nickels or 2 pesos rubbed together, but they would like to perform for poor people. And then they would say, while I'm doing my magic, I'm not thinking about all the troubles that are in my life. That it just created a world for them, in which they could leave that suffering and struggle. I mean, someone like Peter, I think of Peter, who was just so articulate and so talented and so guapo and handsome, and he would make 100. He would make 100 loaves of bread at night, and they would rise all night, and then he would bake them in the morning, and his mother would take them and go off and sell them, and then he would go off and sell coffee by the cup, in the marketplace, and then he would go to school, and that was just his life, and for him to do magic, with Zumba, the two of them, they just kind of were in another world when they were doing their magic. I don't know. Any thoughts about that, Lauren or Carl?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear what Carlos's thoughts too. I mean, to me, I think an impression that I had, I didn't really understand. I was like, yeah, magic, that's cool, that's fun. Like I didn't get it until I saw it. I mean, all the things that anyone who's listening and knows, and anyone who's familiar with Magicians Without Borders, that it's the way that magic is about delight, just the way that the young people used to say to you, Tom, right? That it makes me happy. It brings happiness to other people. It's about delight. It's about sort of suspension of rules for a momentary sort of innocuous and like delightful suspension of rules. It's about kind of storytelling. It's about belief. All of those things are just like such powerful tools and powerful forces.
Yeah. And I can remember little William, Zumba's brother, and we would teach them that cup and ball trick. It had a little red ball in it and a vase, and you put the lid on it. And he told this story about a little boy whose mother died, and he didn't even say that she committed suicide, but that she died. And this little boy, and he took the ball out and vanished it, and it was the vase was empty, and he said, and that little boy lost his heart, and the red ball became his heart, and he said, I know that's true because I am that little boy. And then he said, and I started learning magic, and my heart came back, and he lifted the vase lid off, and there was the red ball back inside. That they would use the magic also to tell these stories that were so profound and healing. The way they would, they used the magic not just to entertain others, but to heal themselves. It was pretty.
I think that that storytelling, it's so liberating sometimes, and it's so. I love the way that the Lauren puts it, like a suspension of rules, or the a momentary time where the rules of the universe just stop for a second. Anything can happen, and that it's something that when you experience that for the first time as an audience member of somebody that's experiencing magic for the first time, and you like it, then you want others to have that experience. And I think that's why learning magic, it's so empowering when you are living in a difficult situation, because you felt that, and then you want others to feel that as well. So I think that's very empowering, and that creates a little cycle. And like we had a couple of episodes ago, one of our students saying, like, I want to do magic, and I want to train other at-risk youth as I was trained, because they want them to have the same experience. And I think that's so powerful. And I wanted to ask you, Lauren, you've done a lot of volunteer work, you've done a lot of social work, and you just said that when you started with Magicians Without Borders, you said, okay, magic, it's cool, but you didn't get it, right? After going through the Campamento, and you realizing that it has some positive aspects to it, how would you compare that Campamento to other social work that you've done?
Well, it's interesting because I think it's like connected back to what I was saying about this idea of the sort of, for lack of a better word, magic of a kind of retreat. And the magic of like a container of a certain group of people in a certain place at a certain time kind of creates this, this force and this glue. And of course, like the work that I do, ideally, the school that I help start and that I help run here, on its best days and in its ideal manifestation, it's a version of that kind of like utopia, right? That we're a community and we're together and we're on the same page. But the thing about that is that, talk about public education in the United States, it's like, talk about not the opposite of suspending the rules of the universe. It's like, test taking, budgets, paperwork, like all this stuff that shouldn't matter at all when it comes to education. That is like kind of, unfortunately, the work that we have to do. So I think that what was so tremendous about that experience was that we really got to focus on just making the best space, like once we were there, it was about making the best and most beautiful space for those young people. And I will say that, Tom did a ton of the work ahead of time on the logistical side. And so did the community organization there. So it's not to say that there weren't logistics or anything like that, but it was pretty amazing to kind of have all of that. By the time we got there, like that stuff was done. And we could focus on that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I just want to highlight a comment from Michael, who said that experientially, it sounds like a young child seeing it snow for the first time. The experience creates a sense of awe.
Yes.
And I think that happens with magic.
Yes.
But also your experience, Lauren, and Tom's and mine, when you go and do something like a Campamento, I think the experience is very similar. Like it's like you're seeing it snow for the first time, and you're like, look, everything that's happening here, and all that we're creating, and that sense of awe. I think it's so important for us to to fuel our desire to keep on doing it, because we've talked about it. It's very, very hard, very repetitive sometimes, but you have to keep going. It's very full of hurdles, but that fuels you, and those moments of awe, I think, are what fuels us.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, do you have one of those moments, Lauren, that do you have something that might stand out from your experience that you want to share?
God, I have so many specific memories, but one thing I'll just say that I was thinking when you were talking, Carlos, is this idea that it's the awe for the audience members, or the awe for the young person who's seeing snow for the first time, who's experiencing this magic trick. But one of the things that I learned from Tom and from other magicians, and from the kind of like young leaders in Magicians Without Borders and from El Salvador, who kind of became working magicians themselves, and worked and supported Magicians Without Borders, and they were sort of like youth leaders, peer leaders, and then became professional magicians, is that like the awe also has to be in the performer, right? Like Tom and Carlos, I've never seen you do magic, but I'll probably email you later to set up a time if that's cool. I want to come to Colombia and watch you work. But the thing that's so amazing, and I'm sure you possess this too, is that like Tom channels awe every single time, such that even if I've seen a trick once, twice, 100 times, it's like no less amazing to me. You know what I mean? Even if I know how it's done, the spirit with which it's done, the fluidity with which it's done, and the delight that is brought to the doing is just like incredibly stunning. And I guess the things that I remember most were exactly what Tom was saying, like when the young people themselves would sort of morph from being the delight and awe, from the experience of delight and awe of the magic receiver to like the delight and awe of the magic maker. And that's kind of like mastery, isn't it? Like really honing like a craft and bringing like love and sincerity and joy to it. Like I guess I learned a lot about teaching from that. That it's like, it doesn't matter how many times I've discussed a certain essay or how many times I've said a certain thing to students, but I teach writing. It's like my job is to like, to bring a sense of awe and a spirit of newness to every single thing. Even if it's something very known to me already.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons I really loved doing Campamento with you, is that you really had that spirit of enthusiasm and freshness all the time. It never felt so much, even though there was a lot of work involved. It had such a playful element to it, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And I think that created a culture at Campamento that was. I was just thinking, Taya doing yoga first thing in the morning. I mean, these kids on this grassy slope going down to this incredible lake that's a crater of a volcano, and volcanoes rising all around the shore of the lake. And here are these kids from the poorest neighborhoods in Santa Ana doing yoga, as the sun's coming up. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. And then them going in, I was just thinking of the meals. I mean, they would initially, in El Salvador, they just serve in the morning for breakfast just these god awful carbohydrate. They're delicious rolls. And they would eat like 8 or 10 of them, and piles of beans and papusas. And they just, ate like they didn't probably usually eat, So even that was like just a source of delight to see them eating and enjoying each other and laughing. And I don't know, it's great. I'm just seeing it in my memory's eye. They were, and I loved the teaching you did. I mean, teaching kids creative writing and magic and acting, and then Ben coming and doing football in the afternoon. They were good times.
Yeah.
So cool. So cool. I wanted to ask you, Lauren, about that creative writing teaching.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think it's so important for everyone, but especially those kids in Campamento, to try and connect with stories and
Yep.
and write them down? What do you think is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to magic, like writing can really be a portal, right? And actually similar to soccer, right? Like, I mean, really anything, and this is why, I'm sitting here in a California public school that I helped start and I'm deeply devoted to and love. But so much of what is wrong with education is that we get too caught up in the sort of, I don't know, we get really in the weeds when, like, what education is it's like whether we're learning magic or whether we're learning writing or whether we're doing soccer or whether we're doing math. It's like, what is education really for? Is it the tool itself? Sure, it's very cool to learn magic. Yeah, it's good that we can like use numbers to like understand money and understand algebra problems, whatever. Do our taxes, whatever we need math for. But remember when I said I was a math teacher before? It's very embarrassing. But like it's, yes, the what we're learning is important, but like the how and the why are so much more important, right? Like the how are we learning it? Well, like we're learning how to learn. We're learning how to work together. We're learning to believe in ourselves. We're learning to try something new. We're learning to have homework and be responsible for tomorrow, right? We're learning to work together, like I said. And then the why. Why are we learning these things? Well, so that we can be in community and so we can be in the world together. And so I think no matter what we're teaching or learning, like those should be what we're holding first. And my greatest heartbreak is that most education systems like have gotten too bungled, that we don't function that way. But in terms of writing, I see writing as a portal to self-understanding. I mean, like I call myself a verbal processor. So, my colleagues and friends and husband know very well that like the way I understand things is either by writing them down or talking them through. We have meetings here at Oakland International High School where there's often think time on the agenda. Okay, we're going to read this thing and then we have 2 minutes of think time. And I'm always like, think time? I don't know what I'm thinking until I'm talking. Like, I got to talk in order to think, And so for me, and that's not everybody, but for me, using words is a portal to deeper understanding. And that was really true for me when I was a kid and an adolescent at the age of a lot of these kids in Campamento were, that it helped me work through things and sort things out. So that's sort of how I saw writing, a portal into emotional understanding of ourselves and of the world.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful, because I think that, I mean, it worked for you, but you got exposed to it early in life, I guess. So that it's so nice that you found it, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that sometimes kids that live in a situation that's vulnerable, or they are at risk youth, they don't get exposed to many things, and that limits the opportunities that they're going to have later in life, and that's why I think things like Campamento are so important, because they're getting exposed to so many things that are new to them. Just having those little breakfast balls that they were new, or doing yoga when the sun is coming up, or learning magic, or having a creative writing class, or all those things are so important to broaden their spectrum of, hey, maybe I like this, maybe I would like this. I think that's so important, that I think that's also lacking in formal education. In formal education, the way you learn stuff is like this, blah blah blah, and there's mandates, and there's reading stuff that you have to learn this in this certain way, this amount, with this kind of people, and peers of your same age in the same room. It's just it limits the amount of things we can experience, that we can identify ourselves with, that will help and help and further our learning in a different way.
I was just thinking, it was at Palma, one of the camps there. There was a girl, very wounded girl named Karen. And I mean, when you knew her story of the abuse and the sexual assaults, it was just ghastly, her life. And she was just caved in. I can remember just feeling that she was like caved in. And I think and she was doing the magic and she was learning. But when it came time, to stand up and perform, it was just beyond her. I mean, she just could not stand up and be seen like that. It just was absolutely too much. But I think now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, there was an amazing moment that happened. And I think her doing like writing, using writing, which she could do like kind of privately and explore her world or do some art. Finally, like the last day, we were working on putting on a little show. And I just asked people, what would you like to do? And everybody raised their hand, said, I'd like to do this. And then Karen raised her hand and everybody looked, and she got up and did this thing that was just so amazing and took so much courage and gave her such a sense of self and power and ability. It was, but I think a lot of the work that was being done in other, call them modalities or whatever, fed that moment, or made that moment possible.
Beautiful.
So such a great story, Tom. Such a great story.
Yeah.
Lauren, I wanted to, to wrap this up. Well, I want to say something before.
Are we already ready to wrap up? Oh my God, you just got here.
Nice.
Such a nice conversation. We could do, all day. Maybe we could do a conversation for 4 hours and we wouldn't notice it. It would be awesome. But I wanted to add something before I ask you a question to end the show. And it's that I think that the work that you do with your writing, especially about migration, migrant issues, and the work that we do in Magicians Without Borders, and also with Campamento, I like to see it as a way to reduce what a philosopher, a Spanish philosopher, Adela Cortina, named in the 90s as aporophobia. In English, aporophobia, I guess it would be the name, which is the phobia of poor people or of people that don't have economic resources, because she coined that term to distinguish it from xenophobia, right? I think they do get confused, and they get confused a lot, because people, for example, in Colombia, we have this crisis of Venezuelan migrants, right? But the crisis, people that are against migration regulation, or they want more migration regulation, they don't mean it for people who are wealthy, right? They mean it for poor migrants, right? And it does not matter where the migrant comes from, right? And I think that in the U.S. is more of a problem, right? It's some people say that the problem is the poor migrants that are getting in because they're getting all the jobs and blah, 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 but it's the poor migrants. So that aporophobia, I think we need to reduce that, right? We need to reduce that. And a way of doing it is telling about those stories about migrants, those realities, and bringing people to experience different situations with people from different backgrounds. That is exactly what Campamento is about, and I think that's the spirit of it. So, having said that, Lauren, do you think that you are a different person because of the experience that you had in El Campamento with Magicians Without Borders. And if you think you are different, in what way?
Absolutely. I mean, it shifted. I mean, I wouldn't have written this book, and certainly not in the way I did, if I hadn't been to El Salvador. And I think, like I said before, already with Tom, and I felt, one of the things that every time we went down there, we learned more about the history and the context and sort of like caused the social woes. That's another thing, right? We don't talk enough about this idea that like social inequities as if they just like arrive and come from nothing, or like people are just poor. I don't know. That's just how they are. It's like, no, there's all sorts of systems and structures that make it so. But in any case, this really set me on a path toward understanding more about migration in the Americas, which I knew less about. And also it just made me a better and more conscientious educator. I think I really thought I wanted to be a classroom teacher. I think that experience sort of lent itself to me doing more work around the classroom, and more work sort of supporting more magical, open-hearted, vibrant learning spaces. So it totally changed my life, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Tom?
Well, I just can't imagine having done Campamento without Lauren. That's for sure. It really felt like something that was co-created, and we each did whatever we did that made it possible. And of course, there were lots of other people, as there always is.
Yeah.
It was great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Carlos.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been awesome. If you guys want to learn more about Lauren's work, please go to laurenmarkham.info. You can find all of her writings there and the wonderful books that she puts out. And please definitely go check out The Faraway Brothers, a wonderful story of two young migrants and the making of an American life. It's been awesome. We're done. I mean, it's already been an hour. It goes by so fast.
Thank you so much.
It's been delightful. And give my love to Ben, please.
I will. He says hello, and may we all meet in the physical plane again.
Yeah, again. Yes. No more. Yeah. Well.
Bye, Lauren. Bye, Tom.
Love you.
Everybody. See you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.